Okay, hey Esteban. Um, my last share with you, I guess, wasn't maybe as easily comprehensible as I hope it was. So let me just show you what I meant. This here is that very picture I shared with you last, and I guess for your preference it would be oriented perhaps like this, to be aligned with the prior considerations of tightropes and stuff, or maybe like that. But this does show that one can take two triangles as the blue and the purple here, which if I wanted to I could rearrange them such that they make a foureyes. That's one of the somewhat tongue-in-cheek synergetics insights that 1 plus 1 is 4, because if I take one triangle which has 3 straws plus another, I open them both up and add them together, such as these. We find that 2 triangles added together give 4 equal. So in other words, 1 plus 1 is 4. Now I can also take these 2 triangles here and put them in as this, which I didn't come up with. It was a kid who I shared this model with who intuitively put these together this way. And I was quite amazed because I hadn't thought of it and considered it before. And just yesterday I put these together this way again. And what I realized was that it's kind of awkward to look at and kind of make out what is going on here. Basically we have 2 eyes out of the possible 2 foureyes that we could potentially place in a cube, even though we would get some interference and overlappings there. But reducing the 2 to these eyes and then placing them like this omnitriangulates the cube, because every so-called square face now has a diagonal. And when I did put this together yesterday, I realized another way to look at this, right? Because if I did, and apologies that I don't actually have that at hand right now, I should have prepared that. If I did put in this pair of triangles as a foureyes, which would be the structure that the complex that we've been conversing over for a couple days now, what we would get is, if we take this triangle here as one of the eyes of one such foureyes, you see how with this as a base, this set of 3 straws here makes a flat foureyes, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4 triangles here, so it's a foureyes. It's kind of like a tripod on that triangle. And in the case of that, placing a foureyes inside the cube, we would have 4 of these flat foureyes all sitting on a foureyes, which, you know, that's close to a 2 frequency foureyes, where we would have 4 foureyes sitting around an 8eyes though. And because in this case we have them sit on the eyes of a foureyes, it's not quite the same thing. Plus, again, we have the introduction of 2 length, so there's a ratio here which is after all something to do with the second root. Again, from my point of view, this is 1, so this is the second root of a half, I think. Yeah, but other than having 2 length at play here, we do now see that placing these 2 triangles in here, we get something that if you looked at it this way, it looks quite similar to this, right? Because essentially it's the same basic arrangement, it's just this has two sets of length, whereas this has only a single one. And this is the dozeneighteyes that I spoke of. So this is a deeply, deeply, deeply relevant and meaningful structure in its own right in terms of synergetics, because if we looked at the IVM, the isotropic vector matrix, we would have a nucleus here, which opens up into a triangle, the layer below, which then goes to another triangle offset, inverted, the layer below that, which then in turn returns into a nucleus. So we have 4 layers of the IVM here, and this is kind of the relationship that is opened up in between all the layers of the IVM. No, not all the layers, but sorry, I'm looking for something. It's not all the layers of the IVM, but all the nuclei. If we started with one fully fully enclosed sphere within the IVM, which would be the nucleus, like what we have in the center of this vector equilibrium here, then going from one such nucleus through 4 layers of the IVM, looks like this. We have nucleus, triangle, triangle, nucleus, and that is the same, right? So this is a foureyes, this is an eighteyes, and that's another foureyes, and altogether they give us a dozeneighteyes, which is the it's one section of the IVM that one could use as what they call all-space fillers, which is a term that Bucky introduced to speak of shapes that if we put them together with themselves wouldn't leave gaps, because in a way the dozeneighteyes contains the gaps. And here is a 2-frequency version of that, and basically we could make out that this contains 8 smaller versions of itself. So all of this is to say, this is really the same structure as taking a cube and putting in diagonals into the faces, but not as diagonals, but as triagonals, meaning not in a different scale, but in the same scale as the edges of that supposed cube. And then we get to the dozeneighteyes here. And we notice how we do have 4eyes sitting on 8eyes sitting on 4eyes. The volume of it is 6 quanta, same as the spheric, which we have here, which Kirby calls the rhombic dodecahedron as a conventional term. Yeah, and in this case again, placing these triangles in here gives us the same exact complex. It's a 4eyes here sitting on an 8eyes sitting on a 4eyes. It's just that in this case we've changed, like we squished the IVM. It's as if I took this and flattened the whole thing, and then it would look like that. Let me see if I can get this in frame. Too close to the camera, am I? That one's looking up, so that way. Yeah, same thing, right? Okay, so all that, it's not really. I mean, I don't even know what our conversation aims for, other than exchanging points of views and making sense of something collectively, which is a worthwhile endeavor. Here is one of those triangles out of that dozeneighteyes. If I take out the other one here quickly, we find that the remainder here is again that transform cube, which doesn't hold the shape, which again is my beef with the solids. They aren't solid. It's nonsense to keep up with that category. Whereas we can absolutely, and I'm being a little bit careful here because I still have to add some skewers into these straws to make them a little more resilient against bending, but you see how now this is foldable again, and here's a triangle, 4eyes, the inverse. We also spoke in passing of a pair of 4eyes edge bound that would make what Bucky called the bow tie, which is essentially a quarter of the vector equilibrium. And we could also have it be 6eyes like this. Yeah, so there's lots of things. Oh, also noteworthy, because we spoke of the quadrays quite a bit, I can put these together like so, and this gives me the quadrays. See? Tripod, skypod, and tightrope. Good to have the words, right? Alright, now since I've already talked too much to put this on Facebook, I'm just gonna put this on my YouTube channel. And because we're here, because I'm at it, let me just reconfigure this non-stable non-struct of a ghost cube. And also it would be called the ghost cube in synergetics to make reference of the invalidity of static space and this being solid. So if I do not have a square here, what happens if I put in the same length as the edges here? Is that the first root, perhaps? Not second root, but first root. We get a pair of eyes, which is stable but hinges. And going from there, we would continue with our connections in the triangles all around the eyes. Next we get to something I've been mentioning, which is that the pyramid, the so-called here, square base pyramid, isn't really square base. It's that square isn't there. It's the gap between the triangles which allows for the transformations, right? Alright, we're getting closer to the end. Here is another connection. Nothing much changed. Here is yet another. And now we're just one connection out to complete it, and we're back at the half of a hex. If we flatten it, which can turn again into a couple of shapes, including the pair of, the 6 eyes, but also 1 4eyes, and inverse, and so forth. I've shown these. And now if we put in the last connection here, we do get the 8 eyes. And note how this one isn't a transform anymore. This isn't unstable, non-stable. This is actually a lot more stable than it meets the eye, even just being paper straws and string and beads. Even more so once I put in the skewers. You see, I've done a video where I wanted to know how many liters of water this would carry, and it wasn't precise, but in a few rounds of trial turned out around 6 kilos, 6 liters of water by paper straws, skewers and string and beads, nothing more. So this is superbly strong and stable because of its omnitriangulation. And while people look at it again preferably like this as a set of 3 interlocked squares, or even like this as a pair of pyramids, that isn't the way this relates to me personally, because I see this as a pair of triangles, one on the top, one on the bottom, and they are sitting on top one another. just as I showed you with that little beaded thing. Yeah, so that's just, you know, my thoughts on the matter here. I hope this makes a little more clear why the what the hell is going on with this one. And since I freed these two, let me just quickly demonstrate what I meant with the integration of these. Again, this is now just two eyes, two individual eyes, and adding them together, we would think one triangle plus one triangle. Well, that's gonna be two triangles in sum total. But that isn't the case, because if we put this together, and here comes my wording, since I call the vectors here, the paper straws, fingers, and I call the triangles eyes, and I call the corners, the vertices, hearts of spheres. What I'm doing right now, I call these things, these beaded beads at the ends of the straws of the fingers, I call those fingertips. And what I'm doing here is I'm putting the fingertip into the corner of an eye. Okay, so here's one triangle, one eye. And this is a lot of fiddly, tiny bits. Sorry. Apologies for being too slow today. Oh, come on. Annoy me not. Okay. That's that. Okay, we're getting there. Here's our pair of eyes. Remember the hinge? And we still have one remaining finger out of the set of 6 that we started with in the two triangles. And once I place that in the last corner here, and I'm just going to wrap it around, you won't notice, only I will. Here is our four eyes. Right? So that is the other option to place inside of this cube, so-called cube, because again this cube of sorts isn't a stable structure unless it's triangulated, which is the very point I keep making, because I think we should be aware of this, we should know, we should care. It's not irrelevant at all. Without the triangulation, there's no cube, there's no volume, there's no room. But now that I took out those two individual triangles, let me put in the four eyes, just to prove to the uninitiated observers that in fact I can triangulate, omni-triangulate this cubic structure by putting in a four eyes, having the cubic frame basically hold on to the four eyes here, like so. Okay, so this is the other kind of possibility, and again, I think your point of view, preferred one, this would be the tightrope guy. That's the other way around. Also, my point of view is this one again, where we have either the tripod or the skypod. But you see how that levels one of the triangular planes of the four eyes with the ground, which is relevant to me. But in this case, just to point that out, I spoke earlier of this. This is now the case where we have the four eyes in the center, and on each eye of the four eyes and each triangle we have a little tripod here. So there is four eyes sitting on a big one, which give us the cube. And if we did do this version, this structure with, with triagonals, meaning all the lengths are the same, then this would be similar, almost like a two-frequency foureyes. However, because the inside of it wouldn't be the eighteyes but the foureyes, it's kind of a little bit out of phase. It's a little smaller than the regular two-frequency foureyes. Basically, we could call this a stellated foureyes if we wanted to use that language. And yeah, I think that's all together quite interesting. But since we're here almost half an hour, I only wanted to do a minute! Sorry. Since we're here, you notice how these have two lengths, which wasn't the case before I cut them. So I've got a set of a dozen leftovers from these yellow straws, which were just the same length as the others. So that's leftover, that's usually wasted when we do focus in our creativity and our manufactured reality, focusing on squares and cubes. We generate waste on principle, which, note how this cube here, we are familiar with that now. The quantum volume inside of the foureyes, that's 1, so the volume of this particular cube is 3 quanta. Here is the other cube that I rearranged into the eighteyes. As the eighteyes, it has 4 quanta. It's actually more voluminous than the cube. Plus, it has no leftovers generated. There is no lack of there's no lack of stability because it's omnitriangulated here. Just to point out, the eighteyes is bigger than the cube. It pokes out a little, but that's because of the nature of the foureyes being pokey. Right, so if you recall what this looked like when I still had these added to the cube, this was the dozeneighteyes, which has a volume of 6. So here is my point. All of this stuff that I'm doing with paper straws and strings seems child's play and silly and whatever, but it's playing on first principles, on generalizable principles of synergetics, and what those show us is that to manifest a proper omnitriangulated cube, we are generating waste to get something which is less than what we put in, because we've put in altogether 1.5 dozen, 18 straws into this, plus the waste, whereas we could have used the same exact 18 struts, dozen and a half, in the configuration that I showed you before, without cutting anything, without wasting anything, to get a structure that is structurally sound, and it is in complete and utter integrity with the whole of the universe. And it's got twice the volume, 6 volume, rather than the 3. So make of that what you will. I, for one, think that these matter so much that I can't stop pointing this out. And I know I may be annoying to some with that. On the other hand, I find it quite annoying that no one in the world seems to care. When this should really be on everybody's minds, because this is something that is playing into every single action we do. Whenever we create something based on squares and cubes, we are principally generating waste. We're putting in a lot more effort than what we would need if we went with the triangles, to just get less out. You know, Bucky is often quoted with his proverbial ephemeralization of doing more with less. The fact of the matter is, unless we're practicing synergetics, there is a profound and principle way in which our very actions are doing less with more. We're getting out less with more input compared to using the same exact materials, the same techniques, the same everything, but a different frame of mind. Okay. So with all of that being said, thank you for your patience and your interest in all of this. It's really it's a bit of an outlier in the kinds of discussions that I've been having, because very, very rarely is it such technicalities as in this trialogue between Kirby, you and I. But I can tell you, I've been glued to my phone for the last few days, repeatedly refreshing my Facebook just to see if either you or Kirby left another message. Because I don't know why, but I just keep being very fascinated and interested by our conversations. Alright, now that's enough. Now I have to upload this to my YouTube. Go figure. Take care. Peace. Salam.